Welcome to First Builders, the podcast for those who shape companies from the ground up. I'm Amber Illig, founder and general partner at the Council Capital, where we invest in early teams solving critical problems in essential industries.
And I'm Tsui, partner at the Council. Today's guest is someone who's built a really big career and now a company around purpose. He's helped scale some of the most beloved software products in the world, and now he's building something deeply personal.
We're joined by David Apple, founder and CEO of Shark Tooth Biotech, where he's developing treatments for CMT1A, a rare genetic disease that affects his young son and more than 1 million people worldwide.
And before Shark Tooth, David was one of the first 15 employees at Typeform, where he built sales and customer success from the ground up and helped the company grow 60x in revenue. And then he also joined Notion at a similar stage again, shaping its early go-to-market motion and helping it become one of the most recognizable SaaS brands in the world.
He's also an angel investor, advisor, and mentor to early founders, many of whom are still figuring out how to balance growth with care for their customers and teams.
David, we're so excited to have you here. Welcome to First Builders.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to use that intro for everything I do from now on. Thank you very much.
We'll copy and send it to you so you have your own personal blurb for the future.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, we're excited to dive in. So let's kind of start at the beginning. You've joined two companies incredibly early. Typeform and Notion helped them both scale into global names. So what drew you to those kind of environments and what kept you there through the chaos of early growth?
Yeah, a lot of things attract me to the early stage. Part of it is that I love building at that stage. I love the problems that you have to solve at that stage. I feel like it's more solving problems from first principle. It's solving the most important, most impactful problems that the business is facing, as opposed to a little further on where, still important, of course, but it's more optimizing than, building from scratch. So I like to build. And then the other motivation, which was not insignificant, is the opportunity for big financial outcome compared to joining something a lot later. I was always my dad always told me, you don't get rich from a salary, get wealthy from equity. So I wanted to join companies early and, either succeed with them or fail with them. But so that's a risk I was looking for.
Oh, that's really perceptive of your dad, because I feel like I have a lot of friends where their parents are like, wait, what are you doing when they join a startup? And then they see it in the news later and they're like, that was a good decision.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's great.
Definitely. And then, we mentioned earlier, obviously you've built sales and customer success functions and teams from scratch. As a former CS person myself, I'm curious to hear from you, what was the first thing that you focused on when nothing existed for those functions?
The first thing I focused on is learning about my customers. And not learning based on just data or surveys, but learning from speaking with them, which is very time consuming, but I don't think there's a shortcut to that. I think you need to spend the time speaking to your customers. I was very deliberate about asking them job to be done type questions, which is less about, their use case or what features they like, and rather about, what problem are you solving for your company? If you didn't choose software, our tool, what would you be using instead? How do you see us compared to other products? And that really helps me understand not just how people are using the product, but what they're trying to accomplish with our product. And I think that then helps me know how to make them successful, whether it's sales or customer success.
It's funny, we've talked with so many founders in our portfolio and guests on this podcast, and it seems like people with customer success DNA do really well at sales because they're so focused on what the customer needs are versus coming across as really salesy.
Yes, especially at Notion. How do you sell Notion? It's a great product. I love it. I actually bought it when I was at Typeform before I joined Notion. But it's not a clear, we're solving this specific problem. It's a productivity tool. So it was only by interviewing customers and understanding how they describe the product that I was able to use the same language in my pitch when I was trying to convince prospects to switch to Notion.
And then both Typeform and Notion had explosive growth, but in really different ways. What did you take from one that helped you navigate the other?
I think one of the things, just mental health-wise, is everything's going to change. Things are really exciting at times, and things are really frustrating at times in both of those journeys. And when things are exciting, don't hold on to that too much because that's going to change. And when things are really frustrating, just know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. So that's from a kind of when I look back with distance. That was something that really helped me in both of those journeys. From a tactical perspective, I think it's one of the things that companies tend to spend too much time on compared to the reverse is we focus and obsess about the things that are not working. Why is this metric not as good as, benchmark or whatever? And we spend a lot less time obsessing about what is actually working and understanding, what's working, what we should pour more fuel on, what we should double that on. And we learned that the hard way at Typeform, because everything was just going up and to the right until it wasn't. Like every company at some point they face, some sort of plateau. And when we got to that point, we didn't really know why we had been so successful until then. So then we had to kind of take a step back and try to understand, well, what was working so that we can try to replicate that again and get to the next stage of growth.
Yeah, that's super insightful, because I think it is really easy to focus on like all the problems. I think it's just like natural human behavior probably to like dig into that and try to fix that versus like seeing like, oh yeah, this is that, something that we should like continue to do. When you were talking about that, it just like reminded me of my days at Komodo too, where I felt like a lot of times we were always trying to problem solve versus figuring out like, oh yeah, we should just do more of this. And then the other thing that you said also just was something that like reminded me of a conversation even Amber and I had earlier today, just about like, when you're in these like fast growing companies, it will be super chaotic. It can feel just like wild times within that when you're, working in it. But if you're able to kind of roll with the punches, right? And like, take your learnings. It's a really great opportunity for any employee who's able to kind of like thrive in that. And those are the types of folks that, again, we love interviewing here and that we love backing, at the council as well.
Yeah, I think to add to your point, nothing determines success more than hiring the right people. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned like the right people appropriate for the stage. And I remember one of the founders of Typeform told me, if you hire good people, you get a good team. If you hire great people, you get a great team. And we were deliberate about that at Typeform, but I think Notion took that to a whole other level. I think, Ivan, Akshay, and the team that they built around them was exceptional. It was really, to be surrounded by people like that.
Yeah, that's great. And then, after that, right, like now you've left SaaS, that whole world, and now you've started Shark Tooth Biotech. What was that moment like, and how did that feel to, step into something that was completely new from like an industry perspective, but also, of course, very personal for you as well?
I'll get a little philosophical for a minute, but I think it was the right time for me. So I had several successes, and once you have those successes, building at the very early stages is brutal. It's exhausting. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of building things from scratch, implementing new tools, implementing a CRM, all those things that I would now dread, but kind of somewhat enjoyed somehow back in the day. And I maybe didn't have the same feeling of I wanted to prove something, didn't have the same drive to do again, like take the next, chief revenue officer role and in the next, AI startup. And so I was kind of taking a step back and thinking a little bit more philosophically about my career with my life, what would give me more fulfillment and more purpose. And then around that time is when my son was diagnosed with CMT1A. And so it kind of fell in my lap. So it still wasn't an easy decision, and I'm happy to talk more about that. But it did feel like kind of the right time. And I think if all that had happened, before I had a few wins under my belt, it would have been harder.
That's fascinating. Like, going from tech to biotech and focused on rare disease is quite the switch. One is so research driven and different types of orgs you interface with. So I'm just curious what that was like, just, initially peeling back the onion and making that transition.
Yeah. I mean, you talked earlier about like when you join a startup, people are like, what are you doing? Are you crazy? And when I left Typeform for Notion, which seems so obvious now, people were like, yeah, I was GM US, I was VP of Sales and CS at Typeform, and I was joining this 13-person company that nobody had ever used their product. And when people started playing around with it, it's not super obvious right away. And they're like, you're joining another Evertree? Yeah. Not Evertree.
Evernote.
Evergreen. Or what is it?
Evernote, I think.
Yeah. Long gone since Notion got here. Evergreen, clearly.
So they thought I was crazy. And same. So when my son was diagnosed, my initial reaction was, I looked at master's and PhD programs to learn about the science. And then I also thought, well, maybe I start my own biotech. And people were like, no, that's not the way you're going to move the needle. You have a business skill set, use that. And I joined the board of the largest nonprofit in the CMT space called the CMTA, which I'm very proud to be part of and grateful for the opportunity to serve on that board. And I initially thought that would be my contribution, as a board member. And And then, again, we can talk about it more, but it was through that lens of being a board member. And also I did end up studying the science through online courses mainly and reading medical publications. But it was those two lenses that gave me the conviction to start the biotech that I started, Shark Tooth.
And can you tell us a little bit more about CMT1A? Even just the rare disease landscape, I think a lot of people don't know much about that. So anything you can share about both would be interesting.
Okay, the rare disease landscape is much more common than I knew, and I think most people know. It turns out that while each rare disease is rare disease as a whole community is 1 out of 10 people, which is crazy. I know
not that rare.
That isn't
not that rare.
Yeah.
And as I have been more public with, my family story, so many people have said, "Oh yeah, my kid also has this," or my nephew has that, or stuff like that. So it's not just that 1 out of 10 that is in the statistics. It's my experiences people then share with me. For my son's condition, so it's, again, without getting too much into the science, he has one gene that's duplicated. So instead of having 2 copies of this gene, PMP22, he has 3, which leads to him overproducing a certain protein. That protein causes toxicity and prevents the myelin from forming properly. Myelin is the substance that coats our nervous system. So like an electric wire that doesn't have the right insulation, the message doesn't get from the brain to the muscles the way it's supposed to. And that results in weakness, loss of sense, and chronic pain, and over time, atrophy. And unfortunately, it's progressive, so it gets worse over time. In terms of the landscape, there's no treatment whatsoever. Like the best doctors can give us is go to physical therapy, and that's all we have, not even any type of supplement or pill or anything. And I think part of the reason for that is that the biotech world prioritizes either diseases that have a large patient population for obvious reasons, or something that's very severe, that's very deadly, like unfortunately ALS. Where the patients are less risk averse and willing to try more experimental drugs. And in my son's condition, we're right in between those two extremes. And so it hasn't attracted the right investment, the right research. And that's why it's not just that I can make a difference, it's that if I don't do this, if parents don't do this, then it just doesn't happen.
Wow. So when you kind of made that decision then to tackle this, what does it take to actually start a biotech from scratch? You don't have to go through all the steps, but I'm sure, especially for listeners to hear who are mostly in the tech world, what surprised you the most? What was the first thing that you had to do that was very different from kind of building out a tech company?
The first thing I did was put together a deck like I was building a tech company and went out and tried to pitch VCs. And I thought, this is my 3rd time being a founder. And as you mentioned, I was at Typeform and Notion. I thought it would be very investable. And it turns out I was totally wrong for 2 reasons. One, my kind of credibility from the software world doesn't carry through to the biotech world. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is that biotech investors these days is a particularly hard macro environment, but they don't tend to invest in an idea. They tend to invest in an asset with data that they can underwrite and they can do their own assessment of. Whereas at that time, I only had an idea. So I spent a lot of time speaking with a lot of people and then ultimately realized that what I thought would be the avenue to fundraising was not, and I had to do more like friends and family, like a lot of small investments, a lot of donations, and I'm now at dollars raised, so it's been going well, better than thanks. When I reset my expectations, I'm doing better than what I had expected. But anyways, so that was one thing that was different from what I expected. I expected fundraising to be easy. It was really hard. On the other side, I expected research and finding partners to do research with to be really hard because of what I shared earlier. People inherently don't prioritize CMT1A, but I've actually been really pleasantly surprised with that. I have 6 programs that I'm working on right now with a variety of different partners with a variety of different technologies, and I'm feeling really optimistic.
That's awesome. And I'm so curious, I could probably talk for hours about what you're building and learning, but I am curious what you're learning now about CMT1A and how optimist or not you're feeling about finding either a cure or a treatment.
One of my favorite new quotes comes from the founder of Waymo, and he said, experts are experts of the past, they're not experts of the future, and that basically you need to use your first principles to figure out, what the future could look like. And when I obsess about CMT1A and all the other experts, CMT1A is one of the many things that they are experts in, right? Mm-hmm. And when I started reading the medical publications about CMT1A, about the Schwann cell, which is the specific cell that's affected, about myelin, about all these things. And then I started questioning. I realized that there were a lot of gaps in the knowledge of the disease. And it's one example is that it's often miscategorized as demyelin, meaning the myelin, builds up and degrades. Whereas I've come to learn, hopefully someday I'll know for sure, but that it's actually dysmyelinating, where the myelin never forms properly in the first place, which, doesn't change the outcome for my son right now, but it does change what different pathways I could drug, where I could target. So there's been a lot that, in the concept of the T shape of learning, very shallow in biotech on a lot of fields, but like very, very shallow. But in CMT, I'm very, very deep. So I'm doing my best to become an expert in CMT.
So cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'd love to switch us back to a little bit more kind of like your founder background and, obviously all your experiences within that. One of the things when we were doing our research, you've often said that retention is the new growth. So for any of our listeners out there who are maybe founders just starting out or operators thinking about becoming founders, what does that look like to you in practice?
So we're talking about, just to make sure I answer the question correctly, we're talking about software founders that are building and why they should focus on retention as like a core part of their growth strategy. Well, I think it's several reasons. One of them is more understanding your customers, and the other one is more metrics driven. I think if you obsess about retention and you understand what drives somebody to stick around or what drives people to leave, you better understand who your ideal customer profile is, you better understand who you should be bringing into the door, and ultimately you build a better and better business with a better and better retention rate. And then the other side of it is, investors will inherently look at net revenue retention and customer lifetime value, and those are really important metrics to show at the beginning that not only are you showing traction at the top of the funnel, but that you're not a leaky bucket and losing people on the other side.
Yeah. And I feel like that's been a topic too, like nowadays with all of the AI, like growth that's been happening. I think forgetting like if I saw on Twitter, on LinkedIn the other day, but just like how people were saying like, oh, these are just like pilots. It's just new revenue. Like a lot of people are probably churning out. And so they're like, it's not clear that all of these like, AI companies are actually retaining their customers for the long term as well.
Yeah. I think that's a fear of a lot of even, my friends who are joining new AI companies. It's like we have 50 million of ARR. Yeah, but how much of that is real? And if I'm joining as like a VP of customer success and my job is to renew accounts that have never renewed, that's a bit of a scary role. So I wish all of them luck. And but yeah, I think it comes back to the importance of understanding your customers, understanding the value that they're hoping to get out of your product for their business, and making sure that you're delivering on that. Because I think, to your point, a lot of the AI spend in the early days was experimental. It's like, hey, we need to use AI. Let's try everything. But then it's only the products that actually show that they're delivering the value that will retain.
And kind of a related question, at Notion, you were helping to define the customer success for a product that people already loved. How did you build structure around something that was already growing so organically?
A lot of people love Notion, and a lot of people love Notion, and a lot of people. So those are the early adopters. The challenge is when you successfully expand or get a top-down decision to deploy Notion across a whole function or a whole company, then you have a lot of people who want to resist Notion, who love Asana or love Evernote, or very few people love Confluence, but let's say that some people love Confluence. and so you have to help them through that learning curve and help them be successful with their early use cases. And while Notion is a really easy tool to use, and it's becoming easier and easier with AI and all the great things that the team is building. In the early days, if someone from marketing who's not necessarily super tech savvy, it's like, I want to build a content calendar in Notion. They don't even know where to start. So there was a lot of helping people be successful with the use cases that were really important to them in the early days. And then creating the templates, creating the playbooks to help people. And a big theme of what I did at Typeform and then also at Notion is anticipating where people will need the help, knowing what's the behavioral data that tells us that we need to re-engage with this user and help them to get over it.
So I think I can guess probably the answer, but I'm curious, like, because it sounds like you're very much an optimist, obviously, in the research for CMT1A, but how are you with, like, just how like the AI world is going right now, and technology in like the SaaS world and things like that? What's your, I guess your viewpoint on that?
I feel so lucky to be living in this era of AI, given what I'm doing.
Right.
AI is helping me in a variety of different ways. One is just initially learning. I'm reading a medical publication, all of a sudden there's a lot of words I don't understand, but it'll say like, agrosomes, and then I can pluck in ChatGPT, what is an agrosome in the context of CMT1A? And it'll explain what that is. And, so it's really helped me learn really quickly. Having ChatGPT at my fingertips is like having 10 PhDs sitting around me that I can ask questions to about anything, and that know, as much as is physically possible to know and to answer my questions. I also am working with an AI company, shout out to E9 Genomics, where I happen to also be an angel investor. But they are helping me. I'm doing a drug repurposing project, and they're using AI to analyze a whole body of data and come up with recommendations of which drugs might be good fits for drug repurposing for CMT1A. Wow. And again, that would not be possible without AI. So those are just two examples, but there's so many more, whether, when it comes to clinical trials, when it comes to the early research, it's been really valuable for me with Shark Tooth. And then for the tech industry, it's exciting and it's scary at the same time, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Quick question on the AI with the research that you're doing at Shark Tooth Biotech. Mm-hmm. I have this, a lot of people have talked about AI for discovery of new medicines and things like that. I have this vision of being able to have like an agent out there that's going and finding disparate research papers all over the place and then reporting back to you, hey, looks like this one didn't talk to that one. There's some white space here. Maybe we should go there and target that. Are we there? Are we going to be there soon? When is that coming? Do you have a sense for that?
I think it's like a lot of areas of AI where it is here and it does work and it'll just get better. So example with E9 Genomics, one of the data sets that we have is what's called transcriptomic data of mice. So it's a gene expression of mice that are genetically engineered to have CMT1A. We can see which genes are upregulated or downregulated as they age. That then tells us which pathways we can drug, and then that can give us ideas of which drugs we can use to fix CMT1A. So basically with AI, they did an iterative approach of taking in the data, figuring out the pathways. They also read all the, publicly available data. From the pathways, they generated a list of hypotheses of drugs. And then some of the drugs that AI came up with were good potential, but toxic. Toxic is not something I'm willing to tolerate for my son. And so then it went and looked for what's called analogs of that initial drug to see if there's something else that is similar but less toxic. And to your point, it's all these agents. And then the other thing that was kind of cool, they called it A/B testing. It's not A/B testing in like kind of growth marketing way. But what they did is they had different drugs compete against each other, like AI agents that compared the two, and then there would be a winner and a loser. And then each drug that lost 3 times would be eliminated, and we ended up with a short list of drugs to test.
Wow,
that's cool.
That's really cool. Just like, short circuiting so many of like the different experiments that you would have to do. Yeah, it's fascinating to have that ability.
Yeah. And then I imagine like coming from the tech industry where things move extremely fast, and then also having a child with CMT1A where you kind of feel like there's some time pressure to solve this problem. How do you think about like, what if you find something that you think works? What happens after that, and like how fast could you get it into the hands of clinical trials or patients?
That's something it's a great question. So where I'm at, just in the practical answer to that is we have a short list of drugs. I actually have an offsite next week where we're going to freeze the short list of drugs. From there, we scope mouse studies because you have to do what's called in vivo studies in mice, and we're going to test a bunch of those drugs. That takes 6 months because you have to breed the mice, you have to age them, then you have to dose them for a period of time, then you have to unfortunately sacrifice them, and then you have to get the readouts. So it's a 6-month process, and that's just the proof of concept to see which drugs have any potential of making an impact. Then we might do a combination therapy test, which would be another 6 months, and then we would do the full-blown mouse study, which would be more like 7-8 months and 4 times the cost, and where you do a longer study and you have better readouts. And that's kind of the fastest route because that's repurposing. So it's using drugs that are already FDA approved to move forward with. And even then, so that mouse study, then the FDA will require tox studies. That's going to be another 6 months-ish. And then you apply for IND, and then you can get into humans with your phase 1 clinical trial. But so that, that whole thing is like 3 years. And that's, again, the fastest route.
Accelerated.
Yeah, so that's my drug repurposing program. Some other programs that I'm looking at, that's more like 10 years out, because just inherently that's what it typically takes, starting something to getting to the end. The way I've been trying to short circuit that is, rather than trying to develop something from scratch, which is not my skill set, is to do what I'm calling drug assembly. So try to reuse things that have already been approved for other indications in the past, so that I can go a little bit faster. Wow. But yeah, it's such like a different time horizon on the biotech side, for sure. Yeah.
For good reason, probably, but it would be fascinating to see like how that can evolve over time, like with things like AI or other like technology advances. Or we had this like company that had come by once that's doing now I'm forgetting, like the not bioprinting, but like having like organoids and like other types of like tissue testing without having to do like animal testing as well. That like ever would short circuit anything.
Yeah, I misnamed Evernote and I said Evertree, but there's a company I've worked with called Evertree that has that. So they developed these stem cells that are such high quality that they believe are better, not just can be an alternative, but they're a better alternative than mice to test certain diseases. But the thing is, like, by the time the FDA approves that,
you'd have done the other one anyway. So it's like probably for future.
But there is something. So again, like, first principle, trying to think outside the box and just asking all this stupid questions because I'm allowed to, because I'm not from this industry. There are ways to get into humans faster. So for example, once I have the first set of mouse data available, assuming it's drugs that are safe and that seem to work, I could go to China or Australia. For whatever reason, those are the two kind of regulatory places where it's faster and easier to get into humans. Convince a clinician that they should dose some of their patients with these drugs and start getting human data in China or Australia with the drugs that seem to work in mice. And that can allow me to then have human data in conjunction with my mouse data when I end up going to the FDA for approval, which will help move things faster. So that's an avenue that's still kind of early. Not a lot of companies are doing this, but it's something I intend to explore.
Awesome. So switching gears a little bit again. So I think like we've seen that you've lived and built in Barcelona and London, now the Bay Area. And I think I see the BCN actually in your background, which I assume is Barcelona.
Right.
Yeah. So how has that mix of culture like shaped your leadership style?
That's also the Barca jersey.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Are you originally from there, or you guys had just lived there for a while?
I actually grew up in France.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm French American. I grew up in France, and after I did college in the U.S., after college I moved back to France, started my first business, sold it for not a lot of money, moved to Spain, moved to London, got my MBA, and ultimately ended up in Barcelona, which is where I met my wife and where I found Typeform. So yeah, I was in Barcelona for about 4 years before moving to San Francisco.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sure it's like very different. I guess, how is that different? Like, working for a tech company while were you working at Typeform in Barcelona then?
Yeah, that's where it's headquartered.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah. So what was the difference in like, I guess, work culture even like for a tech startup in Barcelona versus Notion, I'm assuming, when you were in San Francisco?
Yeah. There's a lot of differences. The European culture the European work culture is different from the US work culture in general. And of course, there's exceptions on both sides. But the expression, work to live versus live to work is, you feel that when you're in both countries. In Europe, you're expected to take your vacation days. And in fact, if you don't use them, they kind of force you to use them because they don't want to pay you out a lot at the end. So they're like, you're expected to take your vacations and you get a lot of vacation days. Whereas in the US, I have so many friends, and I tried not to fall into that, but just never take vacation. And that's just one example. But now in the AI culture of the 996 that people are doing,
going around everywhere.
I imagine that there's startups that do that in Europe, but I just imagine it doesn't go across as smoothly as it does here.
Yeah. I will say I hear more people talking about it on Twitter than I actually know people in real life that are working at 996.
I've heard of, again, I have some friends who are interviewing, and I help, advise them or help them. And
wow.
Yeah, it seems, yeah, maybe the 6 is not real, but the 99 is more real. Yeah.
Wow. I certainly know people that are working hard, but not that their companies are telling them these are the work hours.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
They're a different generation than me, I think.
I know. I'm like, maybe it's I know too many millennials. I don't know. But yeah.
The other thing that's very different is recruiting. It's something, I opened Typeform's office, first US office, and I've since helped a lot of European founders open and recruit open their first office in the US and recruit. And one thing, especially in Barcelona, is that there was no SaaS talent because there weren't any real SaaS companies. And so a lot of the hiring I was doing was more like based on skill sets than on experience. And so my first sales leader was a former lawyer.
Wow.
It's just, you have to hire people from other backgrounds because you can't find people with SaaS backgrounds. And another thing about Europeans that's quite different is Europeans tend to be a lot more humble in job interviews and more kind of realistic about what they actually did or didn't do or what they're capable of or not. And in the US, everybody's really selling themselves, which is what we're taught to do in the US. But then a European founder comes to the US and meets a sales candidate and they think they've just found, God's gift to their company. And only to realize that they mishired because they didn't know how to ask the right questions.
Right.
And that's a mistake that every European founder, I think without exception, will share.
Wow.
That's something that they had to learn.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Something that you don't think about, right? Like that could be a real difference in how you hire and the types of questions you have to ask and how you even approach the interviewing process.
Founding Shark Tooth is not just business for you, it's personal. So how do you kind of navigate the emotional side of leading a company that's kind of born from your son's disease?
It was very hard at the beginning. I'm trying not to get emotional now, but at the beginning, I couldn't go a week without crying. And when I would give my pitch, I would tear up. And it was very emotional. And nonetheless, maybe even more so, I had zero doubt that I was doing the right thing. And not because I'm going to succeed, but because I want to move the needle. I want to catalyze more research, more awareness of the disease. And so yeah, it was very hard at the beginning. Now I manage those emotions better, I guess. I don't know what the right term is. And I think it's a roller coaster. So the highs are higher. Like when I get a new partnership going, I hang up the call and I sprint to my wife Christina's office and I'm like, you won't believe it. Like, they're willing to work with me. This is amazing. Better than closing the biggest deal that, I've ever closed.
Yeah.
And conversely, when you're really excited about something and something doesn't work out, that's tough. Or when you doubt, which inherently every founder, I think, does at some point. Why am I doing this, but
will it work? Will it ever
should I be doing this?
Yeah.
Or this is not going to work, or those lows are really low. But one of the programs I have been part of is South Park Founders, and one of their mantras is you only get a few shots at building your life's work. And I feel like this is, my life's work. It's my purpose. So all the highs and lows are worth it.
Yeah, and it's a great mantra to kind of take in with you, right? To balance out all the highs and lows across that. The other thing that I wanted to ask too, you do so much, right? You're building the biotech, you're a dad, a husband, and also an advisor and an investor as well. How do you find the space to be present across all of that? And how do you think about kind of balancing all of that?
Yeah, I didn't get it right at the beginning, and I feel like I'm in a good place now, but it kind of oscillates. I think one of the things to credit my wife, Christina, we had this conversation and it was like, I'm doing this first and foremost for my son. And if I succeed, but as a result, I didn't spend any time with him as he was growing up because I was so obsessed about work, then I don't think that's what he would want, right? I don't think that's a win for anybody. And it's an exaggeration, but it's not what I want. And so it helps me be even more deliberate about when I'm at work, I'm intense and I work hard. And then when he's home or I take him to physical therapy or, when we have moments, I'm fully present. And I think I've learned in general being a dad, not just with my son Ari, but also with my daughter Zoe, that I value spending a lot of time with them, but it's less about how much time I'm spending with them and more about how present I am in the time I spend with them. So that's one aspect of balancing work and life. And then the advisory and investing stuff. So for a while, I ramped down the investing because it was taking a lot of time. And because as you both know, the outcome from that is very far in the future. And, that's not what I need to focus on right now. The advising I do because I don't want to pay myself a salary with Shark Tooth because I want all the money to go to research. So I do advising to basically pay the bills. And I love it. I work with a lot with two companies right now, TradeSpace and ScorePlay, both AI companies. So I get to be part of the AI boom and learn from that. And so it works well for now, at least.
That's awesome. And kind of switching gears, we're going to go into rapid fire questions. So just say the first thing that comes to mind. So the first one is most underrated skill for a first builder turned founder.
Curiosity.
What's one tool or framework you rely on every day?
Notion.
I was wondering if you were going to say that, actually.
Oh, yeah. And then what's a book, podcast, or mentor that's shaped how you lead?
High Output Management by Andy Groves.
And what's one belief that you hold strongly, maybe even controversially, about scaling go-to-market teams?
I like the expression, build it in a lab before you scale it in a factory. Don't start by trying to build something that's immediately scalable. Just figure out what works, even if it's not at all scalable, and then figure out how to scale it. I used to think I wanted to be the CEO of $1 billion startup. And then when I was close to great founders, like the founders at Typeform and the founders at Notion, I realized that I'm quite happy being a VP or GM and not have to deal with all the, every problem that everybody has and just focus on, my expertise and doing what I do well. So that's something that definitely changed through my experience.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that as well. It changes over time and when you start seeing what it looks like.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, one last question for you. If you had a magic wand, what's one thing that you would fix for yourself? One thing that you want to wish for Shark Tooth Biotech? And one thing maybe for the next generation of founders?
Magic wand for myself, I would just have more time, more energy, and my body would not feel like it's 44 years old, which it is.
I want that too. That sounds great.
Totally.
Magic wand for Shark Tooth, I would accomplish. My mission is getting a treatment for pediatric patients of CMT1A by 2030. And for founders, I really hope that the next generation of founders are less obsessed about money and financial outcome and more focused on purpose and making the world a better place. They don't need to be mutually exclusive. There's plenty of great things we can do that are also commercially viable. But I feel like there is always a trade-off between doing the right thing or doing the thing that's gonna, increase growth or help us hit a certain number in a given quarter. I've been there. I see you nodding. We've all been there. And I just would like everybody to have a little bit more patience and a little bit more focus on doing the right thing rather than the profit maximizing or growth maximizing thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Awesome. Well, David, it was so nice to have you joining us today. Where can people follow your work and learn more about Shark Tooth Biotech and anything else you want to plug?
Thanks. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, David Apple. I am on X, although less frequently. I think I'm David C. Apple. And my website is sharktooth.bio. And if you want to support my mission, if you go to the Contact Us page on my website, you can either donate or fill out a form to have a conversation about becoming an investor. I am always fundraising, so I'm like selfless plug. For other rare disease parents, if anybody's listening, I always prioritize calls. I want to help. This is a passion that goes beyond just my son. Of course, he's my priority. But going through the journey of being that isolation that you feel of being a rare disease parent, I want to help all parents like us. So please reach out.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on here and for the download for, aspiring founders that are kind of coming up right now, maybe with operating experience similar to yours. Hearing some of your learnings has been really helpful. And then also sharing everything that you're working on at Shark Tooth Biotech. It's actually exciting for us to hear because we talked to you about it probably like 6+ months ago, and it's just incredible to see how much progress you've already made. So thanks. I hope you're proud of that. So that's awesome. And we're rooting for you, and I can't wait to see what happens in the next 6 months.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amber and Rachel. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Rachel, what stood out to you from today's conversation?
Well, I really loved the entire conversation. David's personality, of course, he's great, in the conversation. But I also loved how much he was just diving into the science. Obviously, as a parent, I'm sure he wanted to know everything about it and, all the possibilities for treatments and cures in the future. But he was talking so deeply into CMT1A. I was truly impressed by that. The ability to kind of pick all of that up and learn a whole new industry too, like learning and navigating, how the biotech world works.
Yeah, he's so fluent in it. And that's kind of related to something I was thinking as he was talking, which is that he just has a lot of courage and willingness to be new again. Like when he was at Typeform, everything was going well. He had a great position, probably a great career prospect by staying. And then, his parents were like, why would you leave and join a 13-person company? And so that willingness to kind of start all over again, build from scratch, and then again, starting over in an even bigger way in a different industry, going deep on science, almost like back to college mode.
Yeah.
Where you're having to learn really deep subjects and then going into an industry where people don't view your previous experience as, credible enough sometimes. So I thought that was really interesting and just really courageous and really fits in with a lot of the first builder mentality, like people that are willing to stay at companies through that level of scale that's really uncomfortable are typically willing to do it again, whether they're going to go be a leader at another company or start their own company. But he definitely embodied that in even a more way, having jumped over to biotech. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah, and the fact that he was even considering the master's and PhD, he clearly kind of basically given himself that by diving into all of the research as well.
Yeah. And then I loved what he said when he was talking about his founder wishes. He wishes that more founders would focus on problems that matter versus just trying to make a quick buck. I think right now we're living in this moment where, there's a certain class of founders that are trying to game their way into Y Combinator, build something huge. And you even hear, nasty stories about people being like, I know how to raise a lot of capital, raising it, shutting down the company, taking the capital for themselves. I mean, that's really extreme, but you're seeing things like that happen in the tech landscape. And then you see people that are, kind of in the middle where they're like, this seems like a good time to found a company. And it's all AI and B2B SaaS, which is, there's no problem with that. We invest in some of that. But, it's really awesome to see, him kind of pushing founders to think through, what are some of the biggest problems that we have out there as a society and a world and a human, and how can I do something about that? And seeing that there can be, an overlap in a Venn diagram with things that are commercially viable that could be huge businesses. And that's very aligned with our thesis around essential industries. We tend to focus on areas like healthcare and manufacturing. These are areas with a lot of low-hanging fruit and huge problems to solve. And they're also huge markets. And if you can do it right, you can have a really incredible, generational company. So I loved how he, kind of pointed that out.
Yeah, no, absolutely agreed. Awesome. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review, share it with a friend, and subscribe to First Builders wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget to subscribe to the Council newsletter for more founder stories and frameworks that you can apply to your own company.
See you later. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.